Your daily fix of women's mixed martial arts from the UFC, Invicta FC, Bellator, and one championship. Be in the loop, cause Golden State Media Concepts got you covered. Get your fix on women's MMA. We've got you covered on Golden State Media Concepts Women's MMA Podcast.
Thank you for tuning into the GSMC Women's MMA Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I am your host, Arnel De Leon, and hopefully you're doing well for yourself. You're healthy, your family's doing fine, your friends are doing fine. Whether you live in the States or internationally, you are healthy during a time that is very uncertain right now. But one thing that is very certain is that UFC 249 is indeed gonna happen, as it is scheduled that UFC 249 will take place in California, but UFC events that involve international fighters, just international fighters, will take place in a very private, secure island that hopefully doesn't replicate Fire Festival at all, and things go smoothly for the UFC. So now that UFC 249 for sure is going to happen, we got fights being added to the cards, and we have also official confirmation of some fights being official for this card. And that is one fight that I was very scared about for not happening, would be Jessica Andrade versus Rose Namajunas. And it's because I am constantly checking up on any updates on Rose Namajunas, on any interviews, and what I can expect from Rose Namajunas from her training, and for the fact that I follow her on Instagram, so I can keep up on how she's training and how she's pushing for the fights. And when I compare Rose Namajunas versus Jessica Andrade, Rose Namajunas has been keeping herself very quiet for herself on social media, and which is a smart thing to do. Really, you don't want social media to distract you from your priorities during training camp. It can't, considering the fact that there's a lot of distractions happening right now as a result of COVID-19. It is very difficult for. I understand it is very difficult for a fighter to be very focused on their training or to be focused on their fight camp, considering the fact that their fights might be canceled. But now that we know UFC 249 is going to happen, and that Rose Namajunas and Jessica Andrade is not going to be canceled, these fighters can go to training camp for the next week and a half and be fully immersed in their training camp, sort of. So if you've been paying attention to Jessica Andrade, she's pretty much the exact opposite of Rose Namajunas, in that Jessica Andrade is more willing to go out there to show herself currently in social media and in the general journalism media of what she's been up to lately. Rose Namajunas has been fairly quiet. Last time you heard anything from Rose Namajunas was during her interview with Ariel Helwani, to which she said she lost her passion for the fight game. I don't really think she lost her passion. I think she just lost confidence in herself, because when you talk about just Jessica Andrade versus Rose Namajunas, if you remember the first fight between Rose and Jessica, Rose was the underdog in that fight. People came into Rose Namajunas versus Jessica Andrade with Jessica Andrade coming to the fight as the favorite to win. And the idea behind that was that since Rose Namajunas was a technical striker and that she had the tendency of getting herself open shots, which is shown in her fight against Joanna Jędrzejczyk, one thing Joanna Jędrzejczyk doesn't have that Jessica Andrade does have is knockout power. Jessica Andrade is one of the hardest hitters and one of the most powerful, strongest fighters in the entire strawweight division. The truth is that Jessica Andrade, she's fighting one division lower than she really does belong, actually. Because if you look at how Jessica Andrade fights all of her opponents in the strawweight division, she looks significantly much more bigger and stronger than everyone else, with the exception being Weili Zhang. So when you saw Rose Namajunas and you saw Jessica Andrade, you think, well, Jessica Andrade, she literally has all the tools that Rose Namajunas has, but is physically stronger. She's a physically stronger grappler, she's a physically stronger striker, and she has the speed to keep up with Rose Namajunas. So when you're looking at Rose Namajunas versus Jessica Andrade, the immediate assumption is, oh, Rose Namajunas defeated Joanna Jędrzejczyk because it was a battle between two technical strikers that lacked punching power. And then when you bring in Jessica Andrade in, that technical striking goes out the window, because Andrade can do technical striking, she's got reach, she's got length, she's got speed, she's got strength. Jessica should defeat Rose Namajunas. Now Rose Namajunas did lose that fight. Jessica Andrade defeated Rose in the fight, but it's one of those weird scenarios to which, even though Rose came to the fight as the underdog and lost the fight, she came out more impressive in that fight with a higher stock than Andrade did, arguably. Because while Jessica Andrade defeated Rose Namajunas, if you were to look at the fights and you were to analyze everything that happened, it was more in part of Jessica Andrade winning because Rose Namajunas made a mistake. So if you look at the first round, when you had Daniel Cormier, I think it was Daniel Cormier, Dominic Cruz, and Joe Rogan who were doing commentary for that fight, all three of them were talking about how, oh wow, Rose Namajunas' game is so good. Because if you look at the fight, Rose Namajunas was easily dominating against Jessica Andrade in the first round. There was not a single aspect to which Jessica Andrade defeated Rose Namajunas, because in the striking exchanges, Rose Namajunas was throwing out these heavy hands, and she was dodging everything Andrade was doing, pulling out. Rose Namajunas was the better striker. She was the better boxer. She was the better kickboxer. She did a better job moving around the octagon, being more of a dynamic striker, going in and out. There was not a single moment in time in the fight of Jessica Andrade versus Rose Namajunas that Jessica Andrade was the better striker. Because coming into Andrade versus Rose Namajunas, the general consensus was that Jessica Andrade was the better striker than Rose Namajunas, and there are people speculating, making predictions that Andrade would go defeat Rose Namajunas because Rose Namajunas would fight recklessly in the first round. Instead, although Rose Namajunas fought recklessly in the second round, Rose Namajunas was able to hold out on her own, and not only did she hold out on her own, she was pretty much dominating Jessica Andrade in the first round of the fight. She did everything well, even in the dirty boxing aspect. When people were saying, oh, what is Jessica Andrade better at than Rose Namajunas? You say the boxing, the power, and the grappling. So Namajunas outstriked Jessica Andrade definitively. She laid way more significant strikes, more accumulative strikes, and also she did really well for herself in the dirty boxing. Andrade didn't impose her physical prowess onto Rose Namajunas all that much. Whenever she did, Namajunas would go and stop the takedown, or would go and put in she would try to place herself in a better position in the clinching. And for the most part, Rose Namajunas was winning the majority of the fight. The moment to which Rose Namajunas lost was when Andrade went for the first slam. So there were two slams in the Andrade versus Rose Namajunas fight. The first slam came in, and a lot of people were shocked, like, oh my gosh, wow, what a great slam there by Andrade. But then out of nowhere, Rose Namajunas was going for a triangle choke, and is either a triangle choke or an armbar, but she was going for a submission move from the slam. And then I believe that Rose Namajunas thought, okay, I was very close to pulling up the submission victory from Jessica Andrade trying to slam me. So if she does attempt to slam me again in the second round, I'll do a better job in my body positioning, and I'll try to go get the submission for real this time. And so when I saw Andrade start grappling with Rose Namajunas, I saw Rose Namajunas being a little bit more lighter, and I think she was trying to bait in Jessica Andrade to go for a takedown or go for a slam in order to go for a submission victory. And it just didn't turn out well for Namajunas. I think it was bad strategy, and I think it was just bad strategy for the most part from Rose Namajunas' cornerman, and a little bit of overconfidence coming in from Rose, because Rose did a really great job in the first round. Rose Namajunas in the first round of her fight against Jessica Andrade was the very best round I've ever seen from Rose Namajunas. If you were to compare how good Rose Namajunas did in her first round in terms of technique and how she fought as a dynamic fighter, in that one round versus every other round Namajunas has ever fought in, well, without a doubt, Namajunas steamrolled and won that first round easily. She defeated Jessica Andrade in every aspect that Andrade was supposed to win in the first round. Second round, Namajunas became a little bit overconfident. She tried to bait in for a slam. She felt confident enough in herself and in her ability to pull off a submission victory in the second round through putting herself in a bad position of the grappling that she pretty much, she kind of contorted her body. If you look at the slam, for the most parts, it was like Rose Namajunas like trying to forcefully move her body in a certain contorted way in order to get herself in a good position for a arm bar or for a triangle choke. And instead, it just resulted with her landing in her head. So, the betting odds came out with Namajunas versus Andrade. Namajunas is coming into this fight, despite losing in their last fight via slam. Namajunas is coming into this fight as the favorite to win. and I predict Namajunas being the favorite to win this fight. I got some friends and I got some other journalists saying that Jessica Andrade is going to defeat Rose Namajunas this time because Jessica Andrade, unlike her fight against Weili Zhang, is going to fight in more passive, a little bit more safe, and we're going to see a better technical striker off Jessica Andrade in the second time when they fight together at UFC 249. You're listening to the GSMC Women's MMA Podcast. Coming back right after the short break, we will discuss ONE versus UFC.
Check out the show that's built on the MMA. From the UFC to extreme cage fighting, they got the fights covered. Check out the GSMC MMA podcast. Get the latest news on past or upcoming fights. Join us as we talk to and about some of the biggest names in the MMA, past, present, and future. When it's the fight game, there's just one show to check out. GSMCpodcast.com/MMA-podcast. Don't forget to like them on Facebook and follow them on Twitter. Visit GSMCpodcast.com for more info.
So what would happen if one champion fought against a UFC champion? And that is one champion pitching a women's MMA super fight. This is coming in from ABS-CBN News. One championship chief executive, Chatri Sitadong, proposed a dream match between two of Asia's best female fighters during an extensive Facebook Live Q&A with fans last week. During the candid session that lasted nearly 40 minutes, Sitadong was asked to reveal his dream matchup for women's mixed martial arts. I would love to see Xingnan Zhang versus Weili Zhang. I think Xingnan is one to beat Weili Zhang, he answered. The bout will almost certainly be the biggest women's fight in the history of Asian MMA and a landmark moment for the sport's growth in China. Both fighters have taken part in some of the most iconic fights in recent history of the women's MMA. Weili Zhang defended her UFC Women's Strawweight belt in an exceptional showdown with former champion Joanna Jędrzejczyk in March. The fight was an instant classic, and me and other journalists said it was so far the best fight of 2020. Xingnan Zhang, meanwhile, continued her epic rivalry with one atomweight champion Angela Lee back in October. In a follow-up to her memorable win against Lee in Japan in 2019, the Panda lost via submission in dying seconds of a pulsating affair to tie up the rivalry at 1-1. Before that loss to Lee, Xingnan had won 9 straight fights, establishing herself as one of the very best in the world. Incidentally, Lee was another fighter that Sitadong considered when it comes to dream matchups. I think Angela Lee versus any atomweight in the world, Angela Lee is incredible. I have seen her in training, I've seen her go into a bout with pneumonia, with doctor's advice not to compete, and I've tried the best to stop the fight. Angela Lee is an absolute warrior and she's just a genius on the ground. Lee is one of the biggest stars in women's MMA and is likely to be back in action in the near future when she defends her atomweight crown against Filipino challenger Denise Zamboanga. The other name mentioned by Sitadong was the extremely talented Sam Fetrex. The Thai became a double champion in one championship at just 22 years old, winning world titles in Muay Thai and kickboxing. Despite losing her kickboxing belt to Janet Todd in February, Stamp has her sights on winning MMA gold yet again, and showed off the rapid evolution of her ground game with a submission victory over India's Asha Roka last year. I think Stamp Fairtex could beat Weili Zhang as well as Stamp Fairtex against any female striker in the world or any MMA fighter in the world. Even though she's only 4-0 in MMA, she's a complete beast, said Sitadong. While a cross-promotional bout with the UFC remains unlikely, there have been big collaborations in recent times, with Ryzen and Bellator co-promoting a show together in 2019, and let's not forget the trade between Demetrius Johnson and ONE. Now, are we going to see Weili Zhang versus Xingnan Zhang? I don't really think so. Yes, there is some sort of relationship between ONE and the UFC, but I don't really expect it actually. But let's look at Xingnan Zhang versus Angela Lee, because that's the fight that's also being heralded as one of the best fights of last year. And when I look at Xingnan Zhang versus Angela Lee, from what I saw in that fight, I thought Angela Lee did her best to try to take down Xingnan Zhang, and it became a striking exchange to which that would go in more in favor along with Xingnan Zhang. In a striking bout between Angela Lee and Zhang would easily win that bout. The only way Lee would go and win that bout was if she'd go for a takedown or go for clinching or try to go for dirty boxing and try to take her down onto her guard. But that didn't happen, and instead, Zhang Nangzhang did a really good job trying to get in for dirty boxing and then getting out of the pocket. Her ability to get inside and outside the pocket is why there are comparisons between Weili Zhang and Zhang, because both of them they're very ferocious fighters who are incredibly good in the clinch game and the dirty boxing, and are really good at going in and outside the pocket when it comes to boxing, while at the same time having a lot of power. Because one thing you know, when you look at Weili Zhang and how she fights, and compared to Zhang, there's not that much jabs happening if you really think about it. It is them going for power shot, while Joanna Jędrzejczyk is constantly going for like 3 combo jabs. You see Weili Zhang trying to go for like left hook, left uppercut, right hook again. And like you don't see that much combinations happening from Weili Zhang that involves her trying to accumulate a high number of striking through jabbing. And the same thing happens with Zhang. When you see Zhang when she fought against Angela Lee, she fought very similar to Weili Zhang in that she was going deep, diving inside the pocket, trying to go for right hooks, going for uppercuts, and the only time she ever goes for her jabs is only when she's trying to pursue the person, but she only dedicates herself towards one jab. So she goes in towards Angela Lee, goes in for one jab, ducks under, goes for a right hook, and then she's applying so much pressure on her opponent that instead of her opponent trying to go down for a takedown, they're afraid of doing so. You know why? Because in a lot of her combos, for Zhang and Weili Zhang, the combo is jab, right hook, uppercut. And so, if she goes in for a jab, and then she goes in for a right hook, and in a very close proximity, the smart thing to do would go for a takedown. But, if you do go for a takedown, which is something that Angela Lee did try to go for, she would go get hurt. And so, it's pretty much impossible to take down Weili Zhang or Zhang without going through an immense amount of pain or putting yourself in a really bad situation. The only way you can ever... Joanna Jędrzejczyk can testify to this, is that the only way you can actually pull off good strikes or be placed in a good position into defeating Weili Zhang is if you place yourself in a really bad situation, and if you overcommit into trying to go for the knockout or trying to go for the takedown, you'll end up pretty much like Jessica Andrade. And so when I look at the fight between Zhang versus Jessica Andrade versus Weili Zhang, in this scenario, I would go for Weili Zhang, because when I look at the weight division between, yes, both of them fight in pretty much in the strawweight division. Weili Zhang, I always say, if you look at her and Jessica Andrade, they look significantly way more bigger than any of the other women in her own division. Because if you just look at the back and like the width, and like if you look at the back and the width and how Weili Zhang postures herself in comparison to like a Rose Namajunas or Weili Zhang, who although are taller than Weili Zhang just comes across as a much more bigger, much more stronger, much more powerful opponent compared to her other strawweight counterparts. And because of that size advantage and the fact that she has knockout power, I am gonna place my money on Weili Zhang defeating against Zhang. Because although I'm impressed of Zhang's ability to go and keep the pressure onto her opponents, the same way Weili Zhang does, when she fought against Angela Lee, it felt more like Zhang was imposing her own will and her dominance onto Angela Lee, who's more of a counter fighter. And that same kind of style doesn't work against Weili Zhang. Because, I don't know, the way how I saw Zhang fight against Angela Lee is very similar to how I see Jessica Andrade trying to commit to trying to strike against Weili Zhang, and she's kind of overcommitting in the first round. Angela Lee, although a really great fighter, a really exceptionally amazing ground-based fighter, a really good fighter, a really good mixed martial artist, really, even though she's a really, really good fighter, her power game and her overall technical striking ability, when compared to like a Weili Zhang or a Rose Namajunas or a Joanna Jędrzejczyk, or even her power compared to Jessica Andrade, it's not all that much, and it doesn't equate to their kind of level. I'm not doubting. I'm not saying that Angela Lee can't defeat those women. I can see Lee defeat Joanna Jędrzejczyk. I can see her defeat Andrade. I can see her defeat against Rose Namajunas. I can see it. But when you're looking at the fight between Lee's fights against her rival Zhang, I'm seeing a lot of holes in Zhang's game that I think Weili Zhang can easily overcome. From how I predict it, I predict those two fighters, they meet down the center, and then both of them will try to impose their will on each other. And whatever fighter imposed their will on each other through their aggression and their ability to like constantly harass their opponents and try to overwhelm them with striking, that fighter who does that first is the one who wins. And when I look at Zhang, she's always pushing for the pace, while she's not as strong as, which means to me she's not as much of a strong counter fighter compared to Weili Zhang. Weili Zhang can go knock out her opponents while walking backwards, while Zhang, for the most part, has to go push forward in the fight in order for her to like dictate the pace and win. Weili Zhang can go dictate the pace through fighting defensively and offensively, while Zhang is mostly focused on the offensive aspect of things. So I put money down on Weili Zhang winning that fight. Would it be awesome if those two fight? Heck yeah! Possibly it might be even better than Joanna versus Weili Zhang. It would be an absolute bloodbath with two fighters going at it, throwing out right haymakers, trying to knock each other out, and neither of them are going down. It would be an amazing spectacle to watch. It would be a total dream fight between a one champion and a UFC champion, Zhang versus Weili Zhang. It would probably might be a contention for fight of the year, without a doubt, if those two were to fight. So coming up after the short break, we'll be discussing another women's champion in Valentina Shevchenko.
Are you looking for the very best NFL and college football podcast? Then check out the GSMC Football Podcast. Get the latest football news both on and off the field. From the NFL Draft to trades to the rumor mill to the NFL Combines. They got you covered. That's GSMCpodcast.com/football-podcast. Get updates on college rivalries, game day insights, and much, much more. It's football talk the way you want it. This show eats, sleeps, and breathes football. Don't forget to like them on Facebook and follow them on Twitter. Visit GSMCpodcast.com for more info.
The world of mixed martial arts continues to become crazier and crazier by the hour, as it is just reported, as I was recently talking about Rose Namajunas versus Jessica Andrade. While I was pulling for Rose Namajunas to be the favorite into defeating Jessica Andrade, so did a lot of other people. Rose Namajunas pulls out of UFC 249 versus Jessica Andrade. This coming in from ESPN after I just talked about Rose possibly fighting against Jessica Andrade and then moving towards a fight towards either a Joanna Jędrzejczyk fight for the third time or towards Weili Zhang. It is updated here that the repackaged UFC 249 card just got yet another update. So here's the thing. So both the main event and the co-main main event has been altered. We don't know what the result is for the co-main event. We might see Ngannou versus Rosenstrike, or we might see Jessica Andrade fight another person, which is very hard to understand considering the fact that we don't know which fighter is going to be thrown in there to go fight against Jessica Andrade. We are not sure yet. I have my own speculations, but this coming in from ESPN. Former UFC Women's Strawweight Champion Rose Namajunas is out of her scheduled co-main event bout with Jessica Andrade on April 18th for undisclosed reasons. ESPN confirmed Wednesday with sources the card, which was fully formed earlier this week after the coronavirus-related incident, and also the schedule of shuffling, will take place in an undisclosed location, probably a Native American reservation in California. ESPN has Namajunas ranked as number 5 ranked best pound-for-pound women's fighter in the MMA strawweight division. And Rose Namajunas was initially supposed to fight against Weili Zhang, but declined that fight. So I feel really bad for Rose Namajunas at this very moment here. I feel bad that she was meant to fight against Weili Zhang, then declined, and now she's fighting against Jessica Andrade for the second time. And we're unsure of what exactly is happening here, which is really sad, because if you watched Rose Namajunas and Jessica Andrade in their first fight, Namajunas came to the fight as the underdog and was doing a really good job. And so she had probably the best first round she's ever had in her entire career, and from that very moment, everything has been going down for her recently. And so ESPN has Namajunas ranked number 5 among best pound-for-pound women's MMA fighters, and while Jessica Andrade is ranked number 7. It is reported here that Namajunas 8-4 has not fought since Andrade knocked her out via slam, with the women's strawweight title in the line at UFC 237 last May. The Wisconsin native had won 3 in a row before that, including 2 title fight wins over Joanna Jędrzejczyk. Andrade dropped the women's strawweight belt to Weili Zhang the first round via TKO last August. The Brazilian native had won 4 in a row. Prior to that, Andrade, 28, has the most fights in UFC history among women at 16 and has only 2 losses. Joanna Jędrzejczyk was the other one. Since 2015, when she competed in the two weight divisions heavier at bantamweight, UFC 249 will be headlined by the interim title fight involving Tony Ferguson and Justin Gaethje for the lightweight belts. Also on the card, Francis Ngannou is going to fight Rozenstruik. So it is expected Rozenstruik will fight Ngannou at the co-main event. Now, where will this leave Jessica Andrade? I'm not really sure. I got my own ideas. So if we're looking at, because I think Rozenstruik versus Ngannou was going to be the main event for a UFC on ESPN card, and now that main event from UFC on ESPN event is now going to move towards another UFC on ESPN event that initially was a pay-per-view, and that was the UFC 249 event. I'm not sure UFC 249 was going to be shown on ESPN, or was going to be a UFC on ESPN fight. Not really sure about that. But Rozenstruik and Ngannou, that main event is being moved over to this one, and I wouldn't be surprised if that becomes the new co-main event, since we're unsure who Jessica Andrade is going to fight, because, well, who's going to fight Jessica Andrade in this last minute? Yet you have any woman in the strawweight division has just 1 week to prep up against a former world champion in the division, one of the strongest fighters in the entire division, who I always say fights bigger than she actually is in the strawweight division. So we're looking through the rankings here. We got Weili Zhang ranked number 1, Jessica Andrade ranked number 2. I don't expect Weili Zhang to fight against Jessica Andrade this soon. Joanna Jędrzejczyk, who's ranked number 4. You can't expect Joanna Jędrzejczyk to come back this early, considering after her huge war against Weili Zhang. Both Weili Zhang and Joanna Jędrzejczyk has reported that they want to go take some time off after the fights, and I think they've been granted that, considering the fact that their war is probably the best fight of the year so far. And then we have Tatiana Suarez. So Tatiana Suarez, even though she is 8-0, so she's 8-0 in the entirety of her MMA career, but she's in a 5-fight win streak, being 5-0 in the UFC. And when I look at Tatiana Suarez versus the rest of the people in the strawweight division, from Nina Ansaroff, Claudia Gadelha, Carla Esparza, the fighter who makes the most sense to compete right now would be Tatiana Suarez. And the last time she fought was in June. June of last year. Was it June of last year? It was, it was June of 2019 was the last time that Tatiana Suarez fought. And so she's been saddling with injuries lately. So Tatiana Suarez being pretty much inactive for the past year, it kind of makes sense for me when you compare her credibility and how she performs versus the rest of the fighters in the division. I think Tatiana Suarez has the best chance of defeating Jessica Andrade. Because Tatiana Suarez, just like Andrade, fights way bigger than they actually are in their division. They should be fighting in the women's bantamweight division, but they're not. They cut weight down to go fight in the strawweight division, and they, just like Andrade, Tatiana Suarez has a major physical advantage over her opponents. She's a grappler, and if you look at the way Tatiana Suarez fights, she's very top heavy, she's very strong. She can go bring any opponent she has to the clinch and bring her to the cage. And just like Andrade, they're very strong and powerful when it comes to closing in the distances and then doing some ground and pound, or fighting through the clinch, or fighting through some dirty boxing. So, Jessica Andrade versus Tatiana Suarez. Will these two be the ones fighting in the co-main event for UFC 249? Currently, I'm not really sure. I know. So UFC has a track record of having fighters who just came off losses all of a sudden gaining like number of contenderships or title fights. So I can see somebody like a Nina Ansaroff, who just recently lost her last fight. You can see someone like Claudia Gadelha, who's although she's 6-4 in her UFC career, has had 3 really impressive performances against Carla Esparza and Randy Marcos. So I can see Carla Esparza in that discussion. Michelle Waterson, even though she didn't do well in her performance against Joanna Jędrzejczyk, fact is, Michelle Waterson held on to herself in 5 rounds fighting against Joanna Jędrzejczyk. And considering the fact that I'm a huge personal fan of Michelle Waterson and that she's a longtime gatekeeper, it would be a very interesting fight to see who would win in Michelle Waterson versus Jessica Andrade, because they both have a really good ground game and have a really good underrated submission game. So when I look at Michelle Waterson, and Tatiana Suarez being the favorites into fighting against Jessica Andrade. I don't think Claudia Gadelha or Nina Ansaroff they have a favorable, good matchup against Andrade. I think Andrade beats them out in every category, from the striking, the grappling, and the clinching aspect of things. So when it comes to a good jiu-jitsu game here, I think Michelle Waterson can handle herself in a ground-based fight against Andrade, and she has really so she doesn't have the same boxing prowess and power as Andrade, but Michelle Waterson's boxing ability is sort of good enough for her to match up with Andrade to hold herself on for a couple rounds, and I think that's a little good enough for Michelle Waterson. And then we have Tatiana Suarez, who, although her boxing isn't all that well adept, though, her wrestling ability is so great that it's going to be a battle between Tatiana Suarez's wrestling ability versus Andrade Jiu-Jitsu. And now it becomes, what do you prefer? Do you prefer a Jiu-Jitsu ground-based game between Michelle Waterson versus Andrade, or are you going to expect a wrestling game versus Jiu-Jitsu game with Tatiana Suarez versus Jessica Andrade? I personally don't think either of those fights are going to be as interesting as the Andrade versus Rose Namajunas fight. I really believe that fight was going to be the fight of the night, and I think it would be as good, if not better, than Joanna versus Weili Zhang. I really believe that. And sadly, it's not going to happen. I speculate on Tatiana Suarez, and even though the fight might not be the most exciting fight you can expect from a Suarez versus Andrade fight, it's going to be a great fight still. We're going to have a really good showcase of two very underrated fighters in the Start division, and who knows, maybe Tatiana Suarez might pull off the upset here, and we're going to see her versus Weili Zhang, or Andrade's going to win, and we're going to see a Weili Zhang versus Andrade fight. Either way, I hope Rose Namajunas does well for herself, and hopefully UFC 249 can continue on with no more shuffling of the cards. Hopefully, if a fighter says that they can go fight, it's official, it happens, and nothing's going to happen. No one's going to get injured, no one's going to be flown back to another country. Everything will be fine, and hopefully Rose Namajunas does well for herself. I'm hoping that she doesn't lose her passion for the fight game, because she's been really quiet for the past year. Because last time she talked, she said she didn't enjoy the fight game anymore. 1 year later, she's coming back with a whole lot of hoopla, coming in as a favorite to win the fight and be the next one up against Weili Zhang, and sadly, that's not going to happen. You're listening to the GSMC Women's MMA Podcast, coming back right after the break.
Tired of searching the vast jungle of podcasts? Now listen close and hear this out. There's a podcast network that covers just about everything that you've been searching. Hey! The Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network is here. Nothing less than a podcast bliss with endless hours of podcast coverage. From news, sports, music, fashion, cooking, entertainment, fantasy, football, and so much more. So stop lurking around and go straight out to the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. Guaranteed to fill that podcast itch. Whatever it may be. Visit us at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Follow us on Facebook and Twitter, and download us on iTunes, SoundCloud, and Google Play.
While we have Rose Namajunas pulling out of her fights, we got another fighter pulling out, and that is the current flyweight champion for the women's division, Valentina Shevchenko. It is reporting in from ESPN, and to which Valentina Shevchenko did an interview with Ariel Helwani. Valentina Shevchenko eyes a return in August following a leg injury. UFC Women's Flyweight Champion Valentina Shevchenko said she hopes to be back sometime in August from the leg surgery she underwent a week and a half ago. I was hoping that the injury would heal by itself, but when it started to frustrate me just a little bit, doctors advised me to have surgery. Shevchenko told Ariel Helwani during an Instagram live chat on Thursday. They said it can heal by itself, but it will take time, a long time. They advised for a fast recovery to have surgery. I don't want to spend a whole year not doing anything. I'm not that kind of person. I want to get back into fighting shape and do my job. Shevchenko didn't provide details about the nature of the injury, only that it happened around the time of her last fight, which was a third-round stoppage of Caitlin Chookagian back in February 8th. Everything is good. I'm doing my physical therapy, Shevchenko said. It's going to be fine. I will do everything I should do to make my recovery faster, and I expect to be back sometime in August. Shevchenko was expected to defend her title June 6 against Joanne Calderwood in Perth, Australia. The UFC has postponed 3 cards leading up to UFC 249 on April 18 because of the coronavirus pandemic. Shevchenko said that when things get back to normal, she wants to stick with Calderwood as her opponent. In the meantime, Shevchenko is helping her sister Antonia train for a bout against Cynthia Calvillo that is scheduled for April 25 at a fight night in Lincoln, Nebraska. That fight might be pulled in to take place in California instead. Consider the fact that we now know that the next 3 upcoming cards for the UFC that involves US-based fighters are going to take place in America, in the California area, while international fighters are going to take place in an undisclosed island. So Shevchenko pulls out of her fights against Joanne Calderwood, and where does this lead Calderwood right now? She can either A, wait for the next opportunity to go fight Shevchenko, which would be in August, which is kind of sad for Calderwood, because if you're prepping up and you're spending a lot of money on fight camp, and then you're told, hey, your fight is canceled, what happens to the monetary gain here? It is very risky for a fighter like Joanne Calderwood to go and fight against another fighter. And the other fighter that Joanne Calderwood could possibly fight would be against Caitlin Chookagian. So, Caitlin Chookagian's, her last fight was a TKO stoppage to which Shevchenko knocked her out. So, I wouldn't be surprised if Chookagian's name is being thrown out there as a possible replacement, for Valentina Shevchenko to go fight against, Joanne Calderwood. So it'll be Joanne Calderwood versus Chookagian for the second time, and in their last bout, which took place in UFC 238, Caitlin Chookagian won the fight via unanimous decision, and watching that fight, Chookagian completely outscored Calderwood in every facet, and I think in a rematch, Calderwood would go lose, and even though Calderwood might come to this fight more prepped up and more trained, because I didn't think she came in with the best strategy against Chookagian, and after Chookagian is coming off a loss from Valentina Shevchenko, we're not really sure what the mindset and mentality is of Chookagian at this very moment. So it could be Chookagian versus Joanna Calderwood coming at UFC 251. That's a huge maybe. Or you might just have Calderwood be like, you know what? I'm not going to fight, actually. I'm going to go and hold this out. Shevchenko says that she wants to fight against Calderwood. So if I'm in Calderwood's position and I'm not that worried about the monetary aspect of the UFC, I'll be like, you know what? Fine. Yes, I'm not going to make any money. There's going to be no money coming in my bank account anytime soon for the next couple months, but it's all going to be worth it after I make the big money fighting against Shevchenko. That's what I'm thinking Calderwood might be planning. If not, she's going to fight against Chookagian. Another fighter whose name is being thrown out there is Jessica Ai. And Jessica Ai, so Jessica Ai has like a bad history when it comes to making weights. After her fight against Shevchenko, Jessica Ai got knocked out, and a lot of people believe that Jessica Ai would be the one to go dethrone Shevchenko. So after Ai lost against her, she then fought against who did she fight against? She fought against Viviana Araujo in the UFC 245 show that happened this past December 14, 2019. To which she had a really good performance in that fight. She did a really good job fighting in that fight. But my issue with Jessica Ai is that she has a history of missing weight. Her last fight against Vivian Araujo, it involved her going 6 pounds overweight, so it was more of a catch weight fight. So even though Jessica Ai is ranked ahead of Chookagian and ranked ahead of Calderwood, it's hard to convince the booker for the UFC to book to go book Jessica Ai versus a Chookagian or Joanne Calderwood, considering the fact that it's kind of iffy where this fight is going to take place, considering the fact that it might be a catchweight fight. Jessica Ai is struggling when it comes to maintaining her weights, and Jessica Ai fights very differently from compared to Chookagian. So it's a very mixed bag here with those three fighters. But all in all, I do predict it's going to be Calderwood holding out, and she's going to go fight against Valentina Shevchenko coming up in August. Fingers crossed, another women's MMA fight is not canceled, and then I expect Chookagian versus Jessica Ai in a second fight. So Caitlin Chookagian defeated both Jessica Ai and Joanna Calderwood, and I wouldn't be surprised if we see another Jessica Ai fight against Chookagian, because both fighters are kind of coming off a knockout loss against Shevchenko, and if either of them pull out a really impressive performance against each other, because we're talking about like the women of Chookagian, Jessica Ai, and Calderwood, they're in the top 5 of the flyweight women's division, so any of them can all be interchanged, and they've all lost against Valentina Shevchenko, so they're all interchangeable in terms of slotting who's going to fight for the number one contendership, who's going to fight for a title fight. It's very interchangeable, and any combination of those women would make a great bout, in my personal opinion. So while Valentina Shevchenko is out of the fight game for a couple months here, Shevchenko does share a little bit about herself on Twitter, and is coming in from MMAfighting.com. Valentina Shevchenko shares footage of a 14-year-old version of herself battling a 25-year-old. And this is really amazing if you think about it. So, Valentina Shevchenko really has been in the fight game for a very long time. Through the flyweight, though the flyweight queen didn't make her debut in the UFC until 2015, Shevchenko is a lifelong martial artist who has been competing in Muay Thai, kickboxing, and Vale Tudo since she was a teenager. On Tuesday, the now 32-year-old Valentina Shevchenko reached back into the archives to share some footage of herself at the age of 14, fighting an opponent 11 years her senior. Bullet is instantly recognizable as she apparently declined to wear headgear in this fight. So Valentina Shevchenko tweets out, 14-year-old me and my opponent of 25 years old, one of the first professional fights in my martial arts career. It took place in Oman. That time, female fights in Muslim countries was kind of rare. They tried to force me to put on a helmet, but having my rebel character, I refuse. At 14 years old, she was fighting a grown woman in a combat sport. This is kickboxing here. So she's fighting against a grown woman, a professional grown woman fighter in another country at the age of 14, who's 11 years her elder, and kickboxing with no headgear. Shevchenko is a one-of-the-kind athlete. I don't know that many, because I did boxing for years when I grew up, and I knew kids who are 12, 13 years old. Actually, I knew this kid. So I met this kid when he was only 10, and then when he was like 12, 13, when he was 12 or 13 years old, he was already sparring against grown guys who are like 32, late 20s, early 30s, who are all jacked, much more bigger than him. He's a small kid. He was, I think, around, if you were to weigh him, when I first saw him spar against a grown man who was much more bigger than him, he was around 12 years old. He sparred with kids his age who were also 12 years old, but he would always try to spar against like grown men, because his goal was to be an amateur boxer and then move up to the pros. And so at a young age, at 12 to 14 years old, he was fighting against grown-ups and grown-ups, former athletes, people who are jacked, people who are much, much bigger than him. And the same thing applies for Shevchenko here. 14 years old, if I was 14 years old, there's no way I would fight a grown-up. I would never fight a grown adult in a professional sporting event, because I know I would be destroyed. I'm not as developed. But Shevchenko says here, you know what? I don't care about, developments. I don't care about the age difference. I'm going to go out there. I'm going to try to knock her out. And it's not shown here whether or not she did knock out her opponent at 25 years old. But it's very interesting, and it's very inspiring to see an athlete at such a young age going all the way and performing at a very high level at such an early age. That is impressive. So after the short break, we'll be coming back here with some more MMA news. Stay tuned.
This is your ultimate stop for everything sports. The Golden State Media Concepts Sports Podcast. Should I say more? From the NFL, MLB, the NBA to MMA, it's all in here. The Golden State Media Concepts Sports Podcast. Listen now.
So this past weekend was also Wrestlemania, and you know who was involved in Wrestlemania? None other than former Ultimate Fighter competitor Shayna Baszler. So Shayna Baszler, if you guys don't know, debuted in NXT, which is WWE's developmental system, and she debuted there along with Marina Shafir and Jessica Duke, two other former MMA fighters for the UFC. And there's a team of three. They call themselves like the three horsewomen of mixed martial arts. They're very close friends with Ronda Rousey. I think you could see Shayna Baszler, Marina Shafir, and Jessica Duke when Ronda Rousey was in that one WrestleMania event where she participated with The Rock and like she flipped over Triple H. That was the first time you ever saw those four women all together in the WWE. Now, all four women ended up becoming pro wrestlers. Ronda Rousey, obviously after a knockout loss against Amanda Nunes, then went straight towards pro wrestling, and then Jessica Duke, Marina Shafir, and Shayna Baszler followed suit. What's interesting about Shayna Baszler was the fact that she didn't just go in from UFC tough straight into WWE. She came in from UFC tough, but also did independent wrestling in the side. She went through the indie scene, and through her performance in the indie scene, she then transitioned herself into WWE. So it's not like so it's very, very different from Ronda Rousey, to which Ronda Rousey, being the much more bigger name, was like, hey, Ronda Rousey, former UFC Women's Champion, transitioned her immediately into being a pro wrestler compared to Shayna Baszler, Jessica Duke, and Rhea Shafir. Shayna Baszler had to go through the independent scene, and if you guys don't know, the independent scene would be the equivalent of if the UFC is the WWE, then stuff like Invicta and Bellator would then be the independent scene for the UFC. So Shayna Baszler, she made her development through the independent scene, then went to the developmental program in WWE, and now she performed at Wrestlemania in an empty arena fight. So what is very interesting, the reason why I bring this up also is not just because it involves Shayna Baszler, but also in a recent interview that ESPN MMA had with Dana White. Dana White was part of a conference call with the President of the United States, Donald Trump, and in that conference call involved very powerful people, billionaires, rich people, who are representing a certain sport. So we have somebody representing the NBA, someone representing NHL, somebody representing MLB, and Dana White was part of it. They were all talking about what's going to happen in America as it pertains to sporting events. Can we have the NBA season in America? Would it be feasible for it to happen? Can the NFL happen? How is March Madness going to go about? How is NCAA going to go about? And the two people who were not afraid at all of the coronavirus issue was Dana White, and Dana White himself says the other person who's not afraid of this issue and has a similar mentality to him when it comes to the show must go on would be Vince McMahon. So Dana White referenced Vince McMahon as himself, as the two of them being the two people in a conference call who is not afraid of this COVID-19 issue. And so while the UFC is, the WWE, they push toward their biggest show of the entire year, WrestleMania. WrestleMania is the absolute number one wrestling spectacle show in the entire world. Number one pro wrestling spectacle wrestling show in the world. And so while Vince McMahon, while the NBA has got their season canceled, while March Madness was canceled, Vince McMahon was like, you know what? We're not going to cancel our shows. We're going to keep pushing forward. And Dana White did the same thing with their UFC show. So with the UFC show, hopefully we're going to see Jessica Andrade against somebody. I was sad that Rosa Namajunas is not going to fight Andrade, but hopefully we can see Andrade still perform in a co-main event fight, and hopefully it's like very fun, very enjoyable, entertaining. Meanwhile, Shayna Baszler, former UFC fighter, participated in the big WrestleMania event, to which she fought against Becky Lynch. And the interesting thing about Shayna Baszler's transition into being a pro wrestler is the fact that her MMA background is part of her character. It's very strange if you really think about it, in that when Shayna Baszler first came into the main roster, which was Monday Night Raw, which was WWE's like flagship show, she participated in an event called the Elimination Chamber. And in the Elimination Chamber, it's pretty much they throw in 6 women in a cage, and they're going to fight it out, and the last one standing wins, pretty much. That's the general idea behind Elimination Chamber. And when Shayna Baszler came into the match, there were promo packages and hype packages based around the idea that Shayna Baszler should logically defeat these pro wrestlers in a cage because she came from a background of being a cage fighter, while all the other 5 women did not come from a cage fighting experience. So I find it very interesting because WWE has a long history in that they promote that if you are a pro wrestler, you are in the lower end of the spectrum as a fighter than you are to that of a cage fighter. That's why you have guys like Dan Severn, Ken Shamrock, and Brock Lesnar. Since their background is cage fighting, they're automatically propelled up to being, they are just straight up better than everyone else. And that's how they've been booking Shayna Baszler, Jessica Duke, and Rhea Shafir. And that even though in storyline, because WWE is all about storytelling, the storyline is that Shayna Baszler, even though she is a rookie, she's got a cage fighting background, so she's just better than everyone else. So she's only been in the WWE world, been a pro wrestler for about 2 years at this point. So she's a 2-year veteran of pro wrestling, and she's beating all these other women who have been wrestling for an X amount of years, for like 5-7 years. And I find that very interesting. That Shayna Baszler she's automatically the best person in the entire world. She's the toughest women's fighter ever because she did UFC MMA stuff. But when she fought Becky Lynch, she lost in the end. She got pinned. It was a battle of submission holds. So Becky Lynch's finisher was the armbar, while Shayna Baszler was trying to go for a guillotine choke. And throughout the matchup, it was the two of them trying to switch over trying to like battle each other out, trying to get their submission holds in. Every time Becky Lynch would go for an armbar, Shayna Baszler would go and try to counter it and try to get onto like a side position. How they implement mixed martial arts into pro wrestling is very, very weird and different. In the fact that, yeah, it looks kind of fakey, but you have to like turn off your brain for that aspect to enjoy pro wrestling. It's very interesting. And so Shayna Baszler came into that match as a favorite to defeat Becky Lynch. A lot of pro wrestling fans were cheering for Shayna Baszler to defeat Becky Lynch, because the story was Becky Lynch defeated Ronda Rousey in Ronda Rousey's first year as a pro wrestler ever. She became a champion, and in the end, and in last year's Wrestlemania event, Becky Lynch defeated Ronda Rousey. And so Shayna Baszler was like, hey, Ronda Rousey is my friend. She's got a cage fighting background. I also have a cage fighting background, but I am more dangerous than Ronda Rousey. So Becky Lynch ended up defeating Shayna Baszler with a pin. It was a very shocking victory. A lot of the betting odds were going towards Shayna Baszler winning that fight, and sadly, it just didn't work out well for Shayna. The following day, which was on Monday Night Raw, Shayna Baszler cut a pro wrestling promo that she's out for blood and she's like the most dangerous woman ever, and she's going to go after Becky Lynch yet again. And an interesting note about this scenario, about this rivalry between Becky Lynch and Shayna Baszler, is the fact that Ronda Rousey just recently signed a multi-year contract with the WWE. If you expect Ronda Rousey to come back to mixed martial arts, the answer is no. It is not going to happen. After her 2 losses, here's the thing. Ronda Rousey has already cemented her... She cemented her career as one of the greatest of all time. If you say, who is the most popular, most trailblazing, like, women's fighter in the history of the UFC, it's automatically Ronda Rousey. Who is the most popular, like, if you say, who is the most popular MMA fighter of all time to the casual viewing audience, they're going to say Conor McGregor and maybe Chuck Liddell and then Ronda Rousey. They're going to say those 3 fighters. So Ronda Rousey, she has no real reason to come back into the world of mixed martial arts. She's dedicated herself way too much into her film career, her acting career. If you guys don't know, she's a reality TV star now. She's part of the Total Diva show, which is this spin, which if you've ever watched a show, Keeping Up with the Kardashians, that pretty much is Ronda Rousey's show in a nutshell. That's under the guidance of the WWE. So she's dedicated multiple years into competing for the WWE. So and then she's probably going to face against Ronda Rousey's probably going to face Becky Lynch. She might face Shayna Baszler in an MMA style pro wrestling match, which will be very interesting. But yeah, if you think Ronda Rousey's gonna make it back to MMA, the answer is no. If you are a fan of mixed martial arts, if you're a fan of mixed martial arts, and you like the pageantry, the storytelling, the narratives, without someone actually getting really physically hurt, then I highly recommend pro wrestling. Pro wrestling is scripted, and to an extent, it's fake. But you've got characters, you got rivalries, you got storytelling, you got interesting physical dynamics between fighters and competitors, that if you can enjoy that aspect when it comes to mixed martial arts, maybe, just maybe, not guaranteed, you might enjoy the WWE just a wee bit. And you're gonna find some enjoyment out of it. So coming back right after the break here, we're gonna end off the show with a wee little bit of fun here. You're listening to the GSMC Women's MMA Podcast, coming back right after the break.
Are you looking for help for your fantasy football team? Check out the GSMC Fantasy Football Podcast. Get today's best advice on who to start, who to sit, even who you should draft. From sleeper picks to red hot lineups, they got it all covered for you. That's gsmcpodcast.com/fantasy-football-podcast. We'll cover traditional leagues, dynasty, PPR, even IDP leagues. When you need fantasy help, there's just one show to hit up. Don't forget to like them on Facebook and follow them on Twitter.
And my female friends, why I enjoy this stuff, why I enjoy watching two people beat up each other. And I tell them that mixed martial arts is similar to that of chess, and that it's a game between two people trying to psychologically, mentally, and physically beat each other out. But unlike chess, the stakes are even higher for mixed martial arts. If you make one simple wrong move, you can lose brain cells and you can get knocked out. While if you play a game of chess or a video game or even basketball or football, if you make a mistake, those mistakes can be fixed. They can, if a quarterback were to throw a ball to wide receiver and the ball is a little bit off, then the wide receiver and the quarterback can talk about it and be like, okay, this is how we need to run it. This is how we're going to make the play work well for us. Okay, it goes from first down to second down. For mixed martial arts, if you make a mistake, you can get knocked out, you can lose your brain cells, you will end up developing dementia, and it's really, really bad. That's why when you see two very smart fighters trying to duke each other out very psychologically and mentally, it is amazing. We are seeing a story between two competitors trying to be the very best and beat each other out. Mixed martial arts is just chess with higher stakes physically. So, as I am discussing how I try to get my friends into mixed martial arts, they're always saying they can't get into MMA because of the violence. And so I look towards Reddit. Although Reddit may not be the best site to find opinions and views are very objective, a lot of it is very subjective. I like to understand some semblance as to why they don't enjoy mixed martial arts. But then again, I'm the same guy who doesn't enjoy kite flying, while I have friends who enjoy that. So I'll try to see what is the wall or the barrier that stops someone from being a fan, or what makes them become a fan in the first place. So I ask here in a Reddit post here, it is called Ladies of Reddit, what are your opinions of MMA, UFC, Pride, etc.? And it said here from Useless Penguin that I don't really have an opinion on it, it doesn't interest me, but it doesn't bother me either. Also, would you date a guy who practices it? I think, so she responds here that I find it pretty distressing to watch somebody I cared about get head kicked in, so maybe not. Would someone date how do women feel about a guy who they are dating doing mixed martial arts? And in my personal world in life, I've had multiple chicks get into guys who are into karate, who are into taekwondo, who are into boxing, especially since I'm Asian. So I hang out with a whole lot of friends whose background involved them doing some variation of a martial arts, doing some kickboxing, doing some Muay Thai. I got a lot of athlete-based friends, but my female friends found it much more attractive when their boyfriend or when their husband or fiance is involved in a sport that goes beyond just track and field or football or basketball or anything team-oriented. They brag about how the fact like, oh man, he does karate, or he does taekwondo, or he can do a backflip kick. It is so cool. So, for some people, I can understand the nature. Like, if I were to do boxing and I brought over my female friends and they saw me get me knocked out, of course they would panic about it. But I would also have some friends who are like, you just gotta get up, you gotta be a man, stand up, go back out there and kick his butt. It depends on some people. Some people enjoy, I guess, dating somebody who is involved in combat sports. My sister dates a military guy who does boxing and amateur wrestling on the side, and she finds it very attractive. So if you find guys or women who are capable boxers or wrestlers, or they do jiu-jitsu or do Muay Thai or karate, if you find that stuff attractive, then good on you. So I got another thing here from, I couldn't care less about the sports, but dang, are those guys built? So, have you seen Roy Big Country Nelson? I wouldn't exactly call him built. That is mean. See, the strange thing about mixed martial arts is the fact that your physique doesn't really matter in the end. You got guys like Sage Northcutt and Luke Rockhold, who look like, I think those actually are models. Sage Northcutt and Luke Rockhold are legitimate models. Luke Rockhold being an Abercrombie model. And for the most part, like, the physique aspect of things don't really matter. Because when I look at someone like Joanna Jacek, whether or not, like, I find her attractive or not, doesn't really matter. If she fights like a beast, like a monster against Weili Zhang or against Rose Namajunas, if she goes out there and lays a great groundwork of expert boxing, I'd be like, yeah, that's amazing and awesome. There's a reason why a lot of my female friends personally dislike Paige Van Zandt. Because out of all the female fighters out there, she's the one that sticks out like a sore thumb, looking like a model more than anything else. So, I find it very interesting here that I found a post here where a woman was like, hey man, I don't really care about mixed martial arts, but dang, those guys are built. While on the other end of the spectrum, guys, when they look at female MMA fighters, they don't really care all about much about as it pertains to looks. Because although like Paige Van Zandt is attractive looking, her looking physically attractive doesn't really appeal to a large audience all that much. As a male viewer, I don't really care how she looks. Is she a good fighter? That's what matters to me. So that's how I see it. I got another post here that says, I don't like it because I don't like watching real pain in pretty much any circumstance. But I don't care if others watch it. It's just unpleasant for me personally. Definitely understandable. If you don't want to see, like, people, like, here's the thing. I can never watch a YouTube video where a dog is in pain. It's absolutely horrible. When I saw a YouTube video one time where a guy shot an elephant and I was so infuriated and raging, I was very upset and angry that I saw that video of an elephant being shot. I don't know who that elephant even belongs to. I don't know the background of that elephant. I don't even know where the video is even shot at. The elephant got shot in the video and I was really upset by that. And stuff like that makes me not want to watch any video that involves animal abuse. And although it's different for me when it comes towards mixed martial arts because I see it as a sport, it's understandable if someone's like, I don't want to see that because that makes me uncomfortable and that's just personally me and I can't get over that hill. It's perfectly reasonable and perfectly fine. Another post here says, the sport's really entertaining and watching those guys do what they do is kind of impressive. That's the end of my opinion. I don't think the competitors themselves are brutal or barbaric, nor do I think they're alpha and manly or whatnot. They're athletes. They're crazy fan clubs. On the other hand, they have to be the most self-important a-holes I've ever met, or maybe that's just my experience with MMA fanboys in Kentucky. So, MMA fighters, there was a recent discussion point here that was happening for MMA on Points, in that a major difference between, actually it was not just MMA, but athletes in the general sense. The difference between an athlete right now in 2020 versus an athlete from the 90s or the 80s was the hypermasculinity aspect of things. So when we look at, there's a reason why there's a huge barrier between Chris Cyborg fans and Ronda Rousey fans. It's because the fans of Chris Cyborg are the same fans who watched old school UFC and was like, yeah, someone scary, someone frightening, somebody who doesn't look like a model, someone who's not all that attractive looking, somebody who is very frightening, very scary, very tough. Yeah, that's the audience that are fans of Chris Cyborg, while somebody who's a fan of Ronda Rousey likes the glitz and glamour. They're the same type of people who really enjoy Paige Van Zant, like for her looks and for the type of character she is and the fact that she stands out for having a modeling background. It's very different barriers of how you are a fan of something, and someone like Chris Cyborg and someone like Ronda Rousey, someone like Amanda Nunes, someone like Joanna Jędrzejczyk, they all have very different fan bases, and I think Chris Cyborg perfectly encapsulates the very old schooly kind of meatheady, very traditional, very scary, tough looking fighter that you wouldn't want to mess with in the streets. If you saw Ronda Rousey in the streets, you'd be like, oh my gosh, that's Ronda Rousey. She is so cool and amazing. Wow. Hey, you got knocked out. But if you look at someone like Chris Cyborg, you'd be like, oh wow, she's scary. Don't touch her or else she's gonna go knock you out, man. Like, don't even look at her direction, man. She's gonna eat you for breakfast. That's how I believe people perceive Ronda Rousey, Chris Cyborg, and a lot of women's MMA fighters, in that you're kind of placing them in categories. And while some fighters like Paige Van Zant and Ronda Rousey, some of those fighters are very appealing to I think they're very appealing to a large audience in the modern day world when it comes to social media, because they are very active in their social medias. While a fighter like Weili Zhang is very conservative, while there's a fighter like Chris Cyborg, he has a very old schoolish approach when it comes to fighting. It's very, you got very different fan bases with very different perspective when it comes to fighting, and all those fighters represent something different when it comes to the timeline of mixed martial arts. Amanda Nunes and Weili Zhang may represent how diverse MMA has become in 2020, while someone like Chris Cyborg represents what MMA was back in the 90s, and a fighter like Ronda Rousey represents the boom period that is a mixed martial arts in the early 2010s. Every female MMA fighter represents an interesting part in the timeline of mixed martial arts, and I find that very intriguing. And that's a wrap up for today's show. Thank you for listening to the GSMC Women's MMA Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I'd like to ask that you please remember to subscribe to the show and write a nice review. That really helps up. Also, if you can please follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. Thank you, and have a good night.
You've been listening to the Golden State Media Concepts Women's Mixed Martial Arts Podcast, part of the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. You can find this show and others like it at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Download our podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, and Google Play. Just type in GSMC to find all the shows from the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network, from movies to music, from sports to entertainment, and even weird news. You can also follow us on Twitter and on Facebook. Thank you, and we hope you have enjoyed today's program.